If you're looking for that secret hidden fantasy production, I'm bringing you 4 players today that I believe could take their talents to the next level. Maybe their situation has changed. Maybe their quarterback play has changed. Maybe they're stepping into that wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 role. All depends on their situation. These players are going for third-round picks or less in your fantasy community who could potentially turn into, I would say, league winners in the second half of the season. Fill in flex opportunities maybe when your elite wide receiver goes down. So stay tuned. Once again, 4 players that I believe have secret hidden production. Let's get straight into it. Once again, all of these players that I'm bringing you here today are going for third rounds or less. You should be able to get them for third round picks or less here. And my first player on that list, and I think a lot of people may like this or may not like it. I've been seeing a lot of mixed feelings in the community, and that is Michael Wilson. Yes, Michael Wilson does have one of the favorable opportunities going into the fantasy season this year. And you think of why he is one of the best favorable wide receivers on their team, because he's currently right now, as I'm recording this video, wide receiver 1 on this team. Of course, he is most likely going to be the wide receiver 2 going into the season, as we all believe the Arizona Cardinals are going to be drafting either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Drake May. We've also seen that they got rid of Hollywood Brown. He's now with the Chiefs. They got rid of Rondale Moore. He's now with the Falcons. Michael Wilson is currently the wide receiver 1 on this current roster here. Once again, I don't project him to be the number 1 receiver, but anything could potentially happen. But what we do know is what we saw this past year. 38 receptions, 59 targets, just over 560 yards, 3 touchdowns, averaging 8.8 fantasy points per game. He did miss 4 games in the middle of the season. The first half of the season, where he did play with Josh Dobbs, we saw Michael Wilson have a breakout game in week 4 against the San Francisco 49ers. Caught 7 out of 7 targets for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns, 26.6 fantasy points he scored that day. And arguably, maybe not at the time, but playing against the San Francisco 49ers, who were actually really good against the pass, really good against the run, had a really solid defense year round, was still trying to find their rhythm early in the season like every other team does. But that team ended up going to the Super Bowl, obviously not winning. But we all know that the San Francisco 49ers versus Josh Dobbs should have been an easy W for them, but it was a little bit of a roller coaster for that team. And we saw Michael Wilson finally have that amazing breakout game that we all thought and knew that he could potentially have in that offense. That was a favorable opportunity for him going into the season, with Hollywood Brown being the wide receiver 1 and Michael Wilson stepping into that wide receiver 2 role. But that clearly wasn't the case. There was a lot of inconsistencies with that. And we all also expected Kyler Murray to come back, which we did see in the second half of the season, where if you look at it, he only played 4 games with Kyler Murray when he came back after week 10. Michael Wilson really started to play with Kyler Murray in week 15, but in those week 15 and 16, he got 4 targets, but caught 0 of those targets. But then we did see him break double digits again for the first time in the second half of the season with Kyler Murray. That wasn't until week 17 and 18 when Kyler Murray was back, which is very, very exciting. So basically what I'm trying to say is here, there is a pathway for Michael Wilson. You have to envision that Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors is going to step into this Hollywood Brown role. Is going to be stepping into 120 plus targets, to be completely honest with you. But what we do know is that we've seen Kyler Murray produce multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown in the past. And I think that's exactly what we are hoping for going into the 2024 season. Now, we could have a massive curveball if the Cardinals do go 2 wide receivers with their first 2 picks. But I do believe there are other needs in this draft class that the Cardinals should be going. And the number 1 should be the wide receiver position. And once again, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, which will leave Michael Wilson with, I would say, at least 80 to 110 targets minimum, should be finishing out this year as the wide receiver 2, who could potentially be averaging over the 8.8 fantasy games that we have seen in the past. And if you've seen what Kyler Murray has done, and with this new offensive coordinator and this new regime that has come into this draft, or coming into this season, Michael Wilson should be seeing a viable opportunity coming into the 2024 season. And once again, he is somebody that you can send a late third for, that no one's necessarily really worried about, because they're all worried about Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors coming onto this team. So if you can send a late third, or even a mid third, maybe the 307, the 308 here, most of these wide receivers should be already off the board. And yes, you could get some hidden gems. But if you're telling me someone that is already with an elite quarterback in Kyler Murray, who has produced fantasy relevant wide receivers, that's exactly where we would want to be investing our draft capital in somebody that's going to be the wide receiver 2 going on the 2024 season for this team. So if you can, Michael Wilson does have some good secret hidden fantasy production. All right, going into my second player that I do believe has secret hidden production coming into the 2024 season. Now, I did say some of these guys, all these guys are going to be third-round picks or less. I think this guy's situation did change recently, and I do believe he gets bumped up into that second round. But after the NFL draft, I do believe is going to readjust and be a third-round pick again. And that is Curtis Samuel. Yes, Curtis Samuel, one of my favorite players one of my late-round hidden production favorite players going into the 2024 season. Obviously, the biggest caveat in this room is that Stephon Diggs is no longer on this team. Gabe Davis is no longer on this team. Both of these guys have been either signed with new teams or traded to new teams. Obviously, Stephon Diggs with the Houston Texans, Gabe Davis now with the Jacksonville Jaguars, which currently, as I'm recording this video, Curtis Samuel is the wide receiver 1 on this offense here. Curtis Samuel does sign a 3-year, $24 million deal with guaranteed $15 million, and he does not have an out until 2026 on this team, which is actually really exciting for Curtis Samuel, my personal opinion, as a Curtis Samuel liker. I like Curtis Samuel as a player. And let me kind of break that down coming in and why I do like him, because I do believe a lot of people have kind of put him in this box of being maybe just like a gadget player, a guy that's going to do jet sweeps and creative plays. But Curtis Samuel is a lot more than that as a wide receiver. And shout out to Matt Harmon at Reception Perception. Not only does he kind of break it down in his success route rate by route and route percentage, whether that's man or zone coverage, but you can see here that Curtis Samuel has done so much versus man coverage and how successful he has been in there as well. He's in the 82nd percentile in man coverage, which has been phenomenal for someone who has been deemed just a gadget player, right? I guess a gadget players, they do get a lot of separation because they're quick, they're twitchy, they kind of fall into this, Kadarius Toney type of window, type of category. But Curtis Samuel is actually a lot more than that, which you can see here, according to Matt Harmon and his reception perception, and how he can do so much more. He can go down deep down the field. He can play in the slot. He can run the curls, the digs, the comeback routes, and more. And you can be, the gadget player. I don't believe he is a gadget player alone and putting him in that box. He is a do-it-all type of player when we look at Curtis Samuel, what he can do here, according to Matt Harmon and reception perception. Now, you are probably saying, yeah, but they're going to draft another wide receiver. The Bills are going to have to get another wide receiver in the NFL draft. I completely agree. That they're going to be bringing in someone like a Brian Thomas Jr., someone like an Xavier Worthy, a Adonai Mitchell, maybe even a Lam McConkey. And even if some of those guys or any one of those guys comes onto this team, Curtis Samuel still plays a role into this offense. One of the biggest things coming into, I would say, for the past couple years for the Buffalo Bills is who's going to be that next guy stepping up for outside of Stephon Diggs. That was always the biggest conversation, right? 2 years ago, it was like, okay, a couple years ago, Gabe Davis was like, okay, the playoffs, Gabe Davis. Okay, can he bring that into the fantasy season? That wasn't the case. Then you draft Dalton Kincaid. He really wasn't unleashed until the second half of the season, but did he really make a difference? No, they still needed somebody else. And I think that's exactly why they get rid of Stephon Diggs. So this offense can change. They want to spread the ball out a little bit more. And one of the exciting things about Curtis Samuel is that he's had a quote-unquote breakout year in the NFL that went really under the radar here. And if you think back to that 2019-2020 year there with the Carolina Panthers with Joe Brady, who is now with the Buffalo Bills, this is a big reason why they bring in Curtis Samuel, right? Because Curtis Samuel, once again, had one of his best years in Carolina in 2019, specifically 107 targets. He only 54 out of 107 targets. If I'm not mistaken, that's Cam Newton, Kyle Allen year, which was absolutely terrible, if we all recall. But one of his highest fantasy finishes or fantasy points per game finishes was 14.1 fantasy points per game. And that was in 2020, that COVID year. Somebody that was being seen in the slot and on the outside, who really didn't have anyone around him outside of DJ Moore. So he knows how to play and be the wide receiver 2 on a team and still get production alongside a wide receiver who at the time, I'll be honest with you, I didn't believe in DJ Moore, but we always knew he had the talent. It was the quarterback play. You think of the list of quarterbacks that Curtis Samuel has played with, and it has been exciting. You think of Washington this past year. You think of, obviously, he played in Carolina, right? What was it? Kyle Allen, Cam Newton, and then he gets traded to Carolina, and then it's Carson Wentz and Sam Howell. I mean, it's just not exciting. And Ryan Fitzpatrick, if I'm not mistaken, it's just not exciting when you think of the quarterback plays that Curtis Samuel has had in his career so far. Now you think of him going to one of the best fantasy quarterbacks, not only in fantasy for an individual player, but to produce fantasy relevant wide receivers. That is Josh Allen, right? And one of my favorite things is how he is reuniting, like I've already mentioned, with Joe Brady going into the 2024 season. Now, one of the biggest things last year for the Washington Commanders and Curtis Samuel was that no one was expecting him to outproduce someone like a Jahan Dotson. And I think that's exactly what Eric Bieniemy liked, was the separation that Curtis Samuel brought onto this field and onto this team. And we saw him outproduce someone who we all believed in. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video, you probably believed in Jahan Dotson like myself and the rest of the fantasy community. Because let's be honest with you, Sam Howell coming in, a rookie quarterback. Yeah, you had Terry McLaurin, but you also had Jahan Dotson, who was a first-round pick for the Washington Commanders. And Terry McLaurin was going to miss a couple games in the first half of the season because he gets hurt in preseason he's playing the Baltimore Ravens in preseason. He gets hurt. He's not sure if he's going to play week 1 or 2. Jahan Dotson comes in, starts, and who they go to? They go to Curtis Samuel, and that's Eric Bieniemy, making him play outside, making him play in the slot, showing you that he is a lot more confident in someone like a Curtis Samuel than a Jahan Dotson. You can see here, he outproduced him in receptions, in targets, in yards, and in fantasy points per game. He finished significantly higher as well than Jahan Dotson, who once again was a first-round pick just 2 years ago now. So look, Curtis Samuel in the community right now, I can understand why everyone's excited about him. Stephon Diggs is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. He's with Josh Allen. Shakira is not necessarily scary, but Curtis Samuel is a guy I do want to invest in. I'll be honest with you. I know I've been saying anyone, you can get these guys for 3rd-round picks or less. I'm happy to send a late second. I'm happy to take a chance if I'm a competing team and this team drafts an Adonai Mitchell in the 1st round. I'm willing to send the 211, the 212 to acquire Curtis Samuel if that is still possible. As I'm recording this video, I do believe his value is going to continue to rise. So please correct me and let me know what type of trades you made for someone like a Curtis Samuel in the chat here, because he is going to somebody that wants to spread the ball out. You've seen with Joe Brady in the history of this offense and how they wanted to spread the ball out, and that's exactly why they get rid of Stephon Diggs. Because he's a target hog, and respectfully, because he has proven himself. But they always needed somebody else. And Stephon Diggs, when he wasn't getting targeted the ball in big moments, what happened? He got upset. So they needed to get, not even saying he's toxic, he just demands too much targets that Hey, if you throw the ball to Shakira and you need a fourth, it's 4th and 5, and you throw it to Shakira, Stephon Diggs is not going to be happy about it, and if he doesn't catch the ball. So, look, I do believe this offense is going to look completely different. I think there's going to be a lot of pieces around that Josh Allen is going to be spreading the ball out to, and Curtis Samuel might be, and most likely will be, the wide receiver 2 on this team that's going to have a lot of fantasy production, secret production, going into the 2024 season. So if you can, I'll be trying to acquire Curtis Samuel. All right, going into my next player on this list, and I have to say he is one of my favorite players on this list by far. That is Darnell Mooney. I have bought him in multiple leagues already, and I do believe there is a tremendous amount of secret production that is going to be coming his way going into the 2024 season. Let's just start off with Darnell Mooney and his history. Okay, obviously 2020 with the Chicago Bears. He's alongside literally basically no one, Allen Robinson, who was already coming off of, I guess, one of the good years in 2019, and going into 2020 kind of falls off there again. But in 2021 was really the breakout year, I would say, for Darnell Mooney. One of his highest fantasy finishes. He finished as a top 25 wide receiver that past year, and one of his highest fantasy points per game as well, averaging 12.9 fantasy points. And that was a huge chunk of Allen Robinson missing that time. He had 140 targets that year, caught 81 out of 140 targets in 2021 for the Chicago Bears. And what was the biggest conversation around that year for someone like Darnell Mooney going into the year after? Well, it was Darnell Mooney is consistently getting open, but always had overthrown passes to him. And did not matter the quarterback. It did not matter who you believed in and who you liked more. Darnell Mooney was consistently getting open. If I could, I wish I can, show you actual film and breakdown of the routes Darnell Mooney has ran, and the quarterback overthrown, underthrown, or didn't put the ball in the right place for Darnell Mooney to get it because he was wide open. It was one of the biggest things going into that year in 2020 and 2021 for Darnell Mooney. And the quarterback play has not been great for him. He does sign a really good contract with the Atlanta Falcons, 3-year, $39 million contract with $26 million guaranteed. He doesn't have an out until 2026. They paid Darnell Mooney a significant amount of money to come in and, in my personal opinion, produce. Yes, where does Darnell Mooney going to be producing, getting his production out of? Because I get it. Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. Now you have Kirk Cousins. But you think back of all the other quarterbacks that Darnell Mooney played with: Nick Foles, Mitch Trubisky, Justin Fields, Tyler Badgett, Andy Dalton. Kirk Cousins is by far the best quarterback who has produced fantasy relevant wide receivers in his career so far. Now he goes into a good offensive line with weapons all around him. Now you're saying, okay, well, Kyle Pitts, you believe in him. I'm not the biggest believer in Kyle Pitts. I don't believe Kyle Pitts, respectfully, is going to be the tight end that we all expected him to be. I think we need to readjust his fantasy perspective. Now, I know there's a lot of arguments and conversations around Kirk Cousins producing fantasy relevant tight ends in the past. I completely agree. We've been there before. But I think with this offense and how this offense is going to be ran with this, with Raheem Mostert now being the new head coach, with Zach Robinson coming from the Los Angeles Rams, what did they do in the past? What did Zach Robinson do with Sean McVay in the past that we've seen? We saw the emergence of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua both be fantasy relevant. Now, he didn't have the talent in the Bijan Robinson. He didn't have the talent in the Kyren Williams. But what he did like about all those guys were the separation of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua when we saw him on the field. There's no doubt about it that not everyone was saying, well, Puka Nacua was the best separator coming into the NFL draft class. No one was saying that. But he has shown and broken records this past year that he was one of the best route runners and a phenomenal separator. Now, I am nowhere comparing Darnell Mooney to the production that Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp can be. I'm just saying if you were to put Darnell Mooney in that situation where Puka Nacua was, could he have produced and done something remotely close? And I think the answer is yes. He may not have broken records, but I think he would have been fantasy relevant. I think he could have been easily a top 15 wide receiver if he was getting all those targets. He could have easily been somebody that we having a completely different conversation about, because Darnell Mooney has never been the problem. It has always been his situation. And now he goes to the Atlanta Falcons once again with Kirk Cousins, who has produced multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers in the past. We've seen Jordan Addison. We've seen Justin Jefferson. Yeah, we've seen the glimmers of the KJ Osborns and all that other stuff. But I would have to say the overall talent and production and separation from Darnell Mooney, I would say, is better than the wide receivers that Kirk Cousins has played with in Minnesota specifically, right? Obviously, other conversations could be discussed. But that's where I really wanted to expand on the role that Darnell Mooney is going to have in this offense. There's no doubt that Bijan Robinson is going to be the first overall, or one of the first overall targets, also alongside Drake London. Now, I do believe you're going to have the 1-2 punch with Drake and Bijan, but I don't easily, in my personal opinion, I do not believe Kyle Pitts instantly becomes a number 3 target. I do believe Darnell Mooney does eat into Kyle Pitts' opportunity, does take away just that little bit much to be fantasy relevant. Now, I'm not saying he's going to make Kyle Pitts irrelevant. I'm just saying if we were to guarantee Kyle Pitts 80 targets right now, I think Darnell Mooney could at least take 30 to 40 of those targets. And what can he do with that? Can he take more opportunity away? Can Kyle Pitts stay healthy? Once again, there's a lot of hypotheticals in that Kyle Pitts scenario. I'm just saying that Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2 on paper on this team should not be overlooked because Kyle Pitts specifically, in my opinion. And once again, with the way and how heavy Zach Robinson and Raheem Mostert and what Darnell Mooney's contract was coming onto the Atlanta Falcons with giving Kirk Cousins 100 milli, Kirk Millions. I like that. Kirk Millions, 100 milli. I mean, that's exactly where I want to be focusing my attention on is Darnell Mooney. And you can get him for 3rd round picks. I paid a middle to late 3rd round pick in my league just a couple weeks ago when Darnell Mooney got signed to the Falcons, because that was my instant reaction. Now, the only thing I will be concerned about coming into this is that if somehow the Atlanta Falcons do draft another wide receiver with their top pick in the 1st round. I doubt it now that they spend that money on Kirk Cousins and, they signed Darnell Mooney. But if somehow Rome Odunze is there and they draft him, this take is completely dead, right? So just keep that in mind. I do believe Darnell Mooney does have a phenomenal secret production coming into the 2024 season. All right, and last but not least, for my 4 players, to round up my 4 players that have secret production going into the 2024 season, and that is Jakobi Meyers. And he is somebody that went completely under the radar this past year. I mean, let me remind you, in this past year, 71 receptions, over 100 targets, 800 yards. Had 8 touchdowns, over 13.7 fantasy points per game. He finished as a wide receiver 24. He was one of the best. At one point in time, he was a top 12 wide receiver in the early half of the season, and he was outproducing Devontae Adams at some points in times in the game. And yes, that was with a different quarterback in Jimmy G. And I think that's going to be the biggest caveat here. So let's talk about those quarterbacks. Jimmy G is no longer on this team, it's no longer on this team. And Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew are now the new guys coming into the 2024 season. Is it going to be Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew? I don't think it necessarily matters. What I do know is that the role is carved out for Jakobi Meyers coming into the 2024 season. Now, you're probably saying they could potentially be drafting another wide receiver in this NFL draft. They could, but I do believe there's more needs for this offense. I don't rule them out of getting another quarterback, to be completely honest with you. I don't rule them out of drafting an offensive line an offensive tackle who they desperately need. Now, coming in, they could potentially draft another wide receiver because the Devontae Adams is getting older, and this is one of the best wide receiver classes in the NFL. But in the top pick like that, that's going to have to be a Brian Thomas Jr. That's going to have to be someone that we're not expecting to go as high to the Las Vegas Raiders. So I think we just have to keep in mind that anything can potentially happen. But Jakobi Meyers, who did get a really significant contract, this past year, 3 years, $33 million contract with a $21 million guarantee, and they're not going to drop him or cut him. They do have an out in 2024, but that's a $22 million dead cap hit. That's not something that they're going to be investing in at this moment for Jakobi Meyers. So Jakobi Meyers, with that, I would say Tyler Lockett effect, right? Being undervalued, overlooked at times, and probably a very consistent flex option for you going into the 2024 season. Now, he's not Tyler Lockett, who's finished as a top 12 guy and averaging over, 15 to 16 fantasy points per game and finishing as top 12 every year and going in the late rounds of your dynasty startups. He's not like that, but I think he is the Tyler Lockett of that even lower bracket, if you understand what I'm saying there. And Jakobi Meyers coming in, extending a 301 to 302 for somebody who was the wide receiver 2 on an offense who we saw pick up in the second half of the season with Antonio Pierce being the new offensive coordinator there, really excites me when you think of, once again, the role that he is going to be having with the Las Vegas Raiders. So Jakobi Meyers, Darnell Mooney, Curtis Samuel, and Michael Wilson are my 4 secret hidden production type of players that you should be trying to get onto your team right now before their value rises, or maybe even they can be the wide receiver 1 on their team if somehow these situations change in some way or some form. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think of these 4 players. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.